Okay. Neddie, hadn't seen you in a while.
Yeah, where you been?
No, I'm asking where you been.
I've been doing what I've been doing.
We'll make sure. Have you got an event coming up so we can mention this one? If not, I'm going to feel pretty
Absolutely.
bad
We got an event coming up on July the 1st.
Well, don't mention it now. Just do it later. When is it?
July the 1st.
July 1st.
You going to ask me about something then, so don't say anything about it.
So
you got your coffee this morning?
I've had 3 cups, and that's enough.
That's the problem.
I'm at the end of the limits of that. Are we back to church as far as your congregation, Reverend C.J. Rhodes?
Yes, we've been back in person since Pentecost Sunday, so about 4 or so Sundays now. And we're hybrid, so we've got in person, but we're also still live streaming on Facebook.
Well, I mean, but that'll continue. You were live. You weren't live streaming before.
We weren't really before, but we will continue long after the pandemic.
Has that cut the congregation down?
Not so much the live streaming. I think there's still some people a little anxious about returning into the space. But interestingly, even some of our younger folks said that though the online piece was good, it could not replace being in the building because, for instance, some people have ADHD, right? You're watching the phone or the TV, and then you're distracted by myriad things. Whereas in church, you got to sit there and you got to pay attention to what's going on in the sanctuary. So we're happy. And, interestingly, each week more and more people are finding out. That we're
and it's also hard to get that basket all the way into the internet, all the way through Oak Street. As far as contributions.
Well, actually, interestingly, we actually had a spike in giving online. We actually did better during the pandemic than the previous 3 years. So hopefully that trend continues as well.
You guys were listening, coming in, and you heard some things about what's going on in our schools in this country. And surprisingly, we're getting, I don't think it's just Caucasian Americans. I have played numerous bits where African American parents are just outraged of what's going on. Will made a very good point, a salient point earlier this morning. He thought a lot of this may be some feed over from the virtual learning where the parents took more charge and they now see what's going on too. Your thoughts?
That could be. I'm not sure what motivates it, but I do think that because of the dynamics of working families having to figure out how to attend to their children and monitor their children during that time, I think more and more parents are starting to think about, well, maybe the kind of industrialized version of education is not working anymore. Being in the building set hours a day, et cetera. Are there better ways of engaging young people? But I think engaged parents, even before the pandemic, were concerned about what their young people were learning in schools. I know for me and my wife, we're often concerned not just what they're learning from the teachers and the administrators, but fellow classmates, because you could train them up in a way at home, and they get to school, and some of that could be disrupted. So I do think that you're seeing more and more parents open to homeschooling now than before, because in some ways they homeschooled for a year, and it'd be interesting to see what the future of particularly public education will be going forward.
Listen, I want to go to Neddie on this one, but I just thought about something. And since I also have ADD, I'll ask you before I forget this. Hit the pause button here. I mean, it's very seldom that we have a man swallowed by a whale, and I got a pastor in here, so I can't pass this up. You hear that? Your thoughts? Is that, in what you have learned in all of your books of theology, really a story where a moral is supposed to be passed on as far as Jonah is concerned?
Yeah, certainly a moral, but I think this particular story demonstrates that
it could happen.
The Jonah story was literal, right? It actually happened. And I often say that science is often trying to catch up where the Bible already told us God was. So
we see that all the time, don't we?
Absolutely.
Probably find the ark sooner or later, but very, very soon. Has the COVID situation put a big crink in as far as Mission Mississippi? Have you got a reboot on that one, or were you able to kind of keep things going during this whole pandemic year?
Yeah, we kept things going through Zoom. That was our go-to thing, and we were able to. In fact, I'm somewhat similar to CJ. We were able to reach more people, even more by Zoom, because those opportunities of being in person, nothing can take the place of that. I just said it. Nothing can take the place of being face-to-face praying with each other, touching each other. But the Zoom gave us the opportunity to go statewide and even in some instances outside of the state, so people were able to participate through those things.
Let me get an idea from both of you folks, because you look at this on a national basis and you hear all of this going on as far as the race relationship between whites and blacks and CRT, critical race theory, being permeated in schools across the country. As a matter of fact, there are several stories that I have where a lot of people who thought Mississippi might be one of those, it'll never make it here. Florida, of course, have just had the legislature or the governor ban it, critical race theory. A lot of African Americans, parents have spoke up. They do not want this to happen. But, and I know, Neddie, you came in and you said you're not up on this that much. But as far as Reverend C.J. Rhodes, your thoughts on this? Are we more of a racist? Are we in a crisis as far as racism here, or is it blown out of proportion and we're not looking at the positive things or some of the strides we've made?
Yeah, so I think one of the concerns I've had about the whole debate about CRT, particularly as it relates to denominations, the Southern Baptist Convention is up in arms about it. I think it's one, often misunderstood. One, it's a particular theory that came out of legal studies to talk about how race-blind practices and laws and policies help to further perpetuate racialized injustice in various systems. So you think about things like redlining and not giving loans to black people, et cetera. So that's number one. I think it's a unique lane, and it's not the only way that different people have addressed the issues of injustice. And so one of the things I have a problem with is anyone who's now saying, let's talk about injustice, then they're automatically labeled as, oh, that's critical race theory. Well, the reality is there are people who talk about racial injustice. They need to fix that. The progress America has made, the progress it yet has to make, that are not necessarily given to CRT. And I think the way that the conversation has gone forth in the last several months makes having the real conversations about real issues going on, the kinds of stuff that, and I'll let Neddie talk about the kind of expanded vision of Mission Mississippi. If you bring up anything that deals with talking about the truth of the reality of racism today, there are people who want to shut that down. I think that's a problem.
I won't get Neddie's professional wisdom because he always is. It's always encased in wisdom, and I don't think he lets go of any words without chewing them over. So now he's got plenty of time to chew this over during the break here, and we'll get to Neddie and his wisdom.
I love being on your show, Paul.
My guest is Neddie Winters, who's president of Mission Mississippi, and Reverend C.J. Rhodes, pastor of Mount Helm Baptist Church. He makes sense to the point where, just like telling a child, regardless of their ethnicity, you can be anything you want to be. You can, here are the things that are out there for you. Go take advantage of these things. You have to hitch up your bootstraps and go do them. And the same thing, I think it would help racism, it would help the relationship between all ethnicities if we pointed out more of the progress than centering on the past, not to forget the past. Neddie?
You know, Paul, we have to reflect on the past. My challenge to folks is that remember the past, but understand that you cannot live in the past. You got to. Do
you think we are today, and maybe powered by some politicians who want to take advantage of that?
You know, we get stuck in a lot of areas in our society, and race is one of them that we've been stuck on for a long time. You know, the younger generation is talking about, you know, you guys are talking about this stuff. I'm tired of hearing the talk and whatever else. The problem that has been with race is that we've been talking at it, we talk about it, but many times we don't change things. You know, we got policies, we got procedures, and we got practices, you know, that is in place that sometimes the practices, and many times the practices dilute or even make ineffective the policies and procedures things that we've changed. So we got to push the change in the practice of how we deal with each other and how we each other. You and CJ was talking about CRT. You know, CRT got some aspects of it in it as Reverend Rhodes has pointed out so clearly that, you know, are factual. But at the same time, it just has some stuff in it. It's just crazy. It's ungodly. It's not. It doesn't make sense. And I see the school systems, as you were talking about earlier about the schools and things. Before the pandemic, bullying was a big issue.
Yeah,
they talked about it a lot.
Yeah.
And I think what the pandemic helped to expose and highlight a lot of things that were going on. I think the parents were involved and engaged in these conversations of those things, but it didn't get as much publicity as it is with the pandemic, and so the pandemic helped in some way to get more attention and emphasis and focus on parents that are involved or were engaged before the pandemic. But certainly it's been highlighted during the pandemic.
Reverend Rhodes, I could say this as far as race relations, but I could also say this, and Bill Maher said it on there, that he's right about that as far as not only race relations, but the acceptance of gays and lesbians. We are a long way from where we were 10, 15 years ago.
I think that's accurate, and I think I like the term that he referenced from Steve Pinkert, progressivephobia. I think if we're honest about the last 50 years, to say that we progress doesn't mean that we don't have more progress to make.
Yeah.
But this is clearly a very different nation for a lot of marginalized communities than it was before. Now, here's the other thing that I think we've gotten to as well, and I think this speaks to a little bit to what Neddie was saying. We've progressed in a lot of ways, but we've also regressed in our ability to have civil discourse in the public square. So now that if there's any disagreement between parties, then it's automatically, canceled, or, we're going to find a way to get rid of you, as opposed to saying, let's reason together, let's dialogue, let's come to certain conclusions that may be on different sides of the spectrum. And so one of the things we got to recover, even as we progress as a nation, is the ability to civilly disagree, and to understand that any kind of change doesn't happen overnight. That all the changes we've experienced over the last several decades, last few hundred years, have been long won and long fought. And I'm hoping that my generation and younger understand the importance of how to make change happen, and not just tweet about it.
Paul, on that same line, when we talk about the opportunities in America, absolutely, we've made wonderful progress. One of the questions I put before people during our days of dialogue, the first question to them: how have race relations changed in the last 20 years? I usually the last 50 years, but since Barack Obama got elected, you got to update it. And so they would talk about the opportunities, economic, social, schools-wide, but very little discussion is had about relationships. And so I believe one of the challenging aspects of all the progress we've made is that we've ignored each other in terms of relationships. Mm-hmm. You start talking to people about how has racially your influence of folks or your friendships or people coming into dinner, people connecting with you, how have that changed in any significant way? And there's very little discussion about it because we don't spend time.
Why do you think that is?
Because we think one and done deal. The civil rights movement changed things. And so we think, well, it's just going to happen. Well, it's not going to happen. You got to be very intentional about developing relationships. You got to go out of your way. You got to inconvenience yourself.
Would you think that's more the onus is on the white?
I think it's on
blacks?
Both. It's on both.
Let me give you an example. If I'm here on the air and I start talking about too much the crime, black on black crime, I will have social media come out and say, "Boy, you sound like a racist."
Well, the challenge with that is that, again, the relationship is not there. Here is Paul Gallo on his show talking about inner city. What do you know about inner city? It's the relationship kind of thing. And
whoa. Yeah. I don't live in the project, so I can't speak of it?
Well, I didn't say that.
I know that, but a dead person's a dead person, regardless.
I
stats are stats.
Listen, man, I spend a lot of my time in the inner city praying. I'll be at City Hall this morning at 10:30.
Here's what aggravates me about that.
Yeah.
Is I'm sitting there, it's almost like abortion, and talking about that as far as African Americans and the sizable number of people who've been aborted and didn't get a chance to breathe outside the womb. And then I'm talking racist because I'm talking about that. I don't know anything as far as personally on abortion.
Pastor Rhodes hit on that earlier, is that we don't have the civil discourse that we need to sit down and reason together. we are so accustomed to now because of social media
Mm-hmm.
and the lack of relationship, lack of understanding, lack of seeing things in a biblical way. So I'm talking from a biblical perspective.
I understand, and I'm a realist too, and understanding you and I are boomers, and we've had a chance to change this. It's too late for us. It's got to be to the next generation.
Well, they told me that
hoping.
back in the 50s and 60s. Listen now, Paul.
Well, they were right.
Well, the thing about it is that we keep kicking this can down the road, and we need to stop it, and we need to stop it today. We need to deal with this thing today.
We haven't done it.
Yeah, but it's not too late.
No, it's not too late, and that's what I said. I'm hoping that the millennials and the next genders or whatever they are comes up behind us. We'll take care of this.
But I also think it's going to take an intergenerational approach, right? I mean, think about the state of Mississippi and the fact that we keep losing my generation and others to other states. Interestingly enough, to other former Confederate states.
Yeah.
Most of my colleagues moved to Texas, to Tennessee, to Georgia.
What do you think the reason is for that?
There are a number. In fact, it was interesting you asked that. I was at a meeting with Empower Mississippi. They had a summit recently, and Speaker Gunn was there talking about the income tax piece. And so I was talking to Cindy, who used to work with us at Mission Mississippi. She said, "What do you think is the real reason why young people are leaving?" So I've not heard any of my colleagues say they're leaving because of income tax. I mean, that may be a part of it. Most of the better jobs are still occupied by you old folks. I mean, that's that's it. I mean, you don't have a whole lot of gainful employment.
Hey, don't be bitching to us. Get your work ethic up.
Well, but here's the thing. You can go, let's say you're in education or in medical field, you can go to Texas, you can go to Georgia, Tennessee, get much better pay.
It's always been that way, though.
And so that's the point I came down the road.
Point, Paul.
So, for instance, when I moved to North Carolina to go to Duke, they said that they had made changes 30
Why
years
did you
before.
go to Duke?
We can talk about that.
Is Duke somewhere near Tutwiler?
But the state of North Carolina made the proper investments decades before, and I think right now Mississippi has to do the same kind of thing.
Let me throw a couple of reasons that I think, and watch this, because I hear this all the time, why we're losing population. Let me throw a couple of things at you, and you can disagree with me. You got a short segment coming up with the wise Neddie Winters and the Reverend C.J. Rhodes. Godly men, both of them. Back in a moment.
Remember your promise.
Goes with Neddie Winters and also Reverend C.J. Rhodes. All right, real quickly, because I'm going to make sure I get some time. But could the reason be that we're losing these people? We are and have been. It's much like, I'm trying to think of a quick analogy, that our grandparents and great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents and great-great-great-grand, all of them had student loans and we got to pay them off. They've never been paid off, and they just roll over to every generation. It's that way in a lot of times as far as poverty is concerned. When we start every single day, and I've said this before, we start with more poverty than any other state in the nation. We have great things going on. We have some successes, but those successes are overshadowed because we have generational poverty from year to year, generation to generation, and we have to take care of that. If we go out and we catch a lot of fish to try to feed the family, a lot of those fish have to go to those people who need it, white and black, don't get me wrong. And we see that, and there is poverty here. And we don't have the training, we don't have the schools, because we're always trying to catch up from that and pay off those student loans. I think we're doing a better job. I think there are a lot of progressive things happening. And the last 10 years, 15 years, we've made some remarkable progresses on that. But we cannot say that 140 years of total domination of the Democrat Party, the Democrats... The Democrats built this state.
I should have saw that coming.
The Democrats. Well, tell me if I'm wrong. The Democrats built this state. They drew the blueprints. They got the foundation. They built the bricks of the state, and they've controlled the state for 140 years after Reconstruction.
But, it's interesting. We just talked about this off the air, though. So for the last 30 or 40 years, Republicans have by and large been in control, and it took the last year or two for us to actually finally change the flag that the Democrats put in place in 1894. So
why didn't they change it all these years?
Because the Republicans wanted to keep it in place.
Well, no, the Democrats wanted to keep it in place longer than the Republicans.
And the Republicans, the party of Lincoln, didn't do anything to move on it until the last several years.
That's fair. But
so I do think for most of my peers, we see that there's it's not so much a partisan issue as much as it is a vision issue, and that the Mississippi Economic Council 5 or 7 years ago said that there were certain issues that were happening in Mississippi that was detracting younger folks, and much hasn't really been done since those statements were made. So I think the poverty piece is definitely a part of the issue.
But these people are staying, and I say these people, the folks who need it, and the folks who are generationally on all these different subsidies. It's year after year. The educational system is not improving in some of these areas. We have black leaders, mayors, police chief, aldermen. They are in control of that. And it's not getting any better. They are in control of their schools. They're in control of their cities. And they're not showing progress and getting their constituents out of poverty.
Yeah, but the other piece of that, though, that I think that we're kind of missing on, it's not just black folk leaving the state. It's white folk leaving the state. And if you ask the folks who are leaving, they're by and large not talking about intergenerational poverty. They're talking about the lack of opportunity elsewhere.
One more thing, and I got to get him on here. One more thing is, just as Bill Maher said, you're not looking at the progressive things as far as the aeronautical industry, the automobile industry, the tire industry, what's going on as far as Google and Amazon, and the remarkable progress we have made, third grade reading gate. And we are making progress, but according to you, we can excuse the 140 years of the Democrats not changing the flag, but we can't excuse the last 10 years of Republicans.
No. What I was saying is to talk about 140 years without thinking about the last 30, 40 years where Republicans have been in power.
They haven't been in power 30, 40 years.
Well, as long as I've been alive, at least almost all the last several governors have been Republican.
Yeah, but as far as total domination like the Democrats, they have not been. And one more thing here. Don't you believe also the national media is responsible a little bit? Because we have kids, as soon as they watch TV, they hear how bad Mississippi is.
That could have a part to play in it. But
I gotta believe that's a big part.
My experience has been the folks who've had their own Mississippi experience of not getting employment, being turned down for this, turned down for that, the lack of a quality of life in most of our cities and towns, and leadership, whether it's black, white, Republican, Democrat, in most of these towns, wanting to keep things just the way they are. And so it's like, well, I stay here and fight when I can go to Atlanta, I can go to Nashville, I can go to Dallas, I can go to Houston and live a better life.
Final thoughts from Neddie, real quick.
I hear the music in the background. I get the final thought.
You got 40 seconds.
On July the 1st, we will have a statewide prayer vigil starting here in Jackson, and we're inviting folks to join us around the state. We did it on July 4th last year. We do it on July 1st this year. We invite you to go to missionmississippi.org for more information. 601-353-6477. We believe God is calling our attention away from the physical to the spiritual. And we are challenging folks to focus on God and not focus on all these things that we have been talking about this morning, but focus on God to change those and trust Him. You know, people leaving the state, you're talking about.
10 seconds.
I want you to look at McGee, Mississippi, and look at
8 seconds.
Mendenhall, Mississippi.
2 seconds.
The difference is that was progressive thinking in McGee and not